again.
Uh, Not good.
No.
Oops. All right. All righty. Let's get this party started. Hello, everyone. 30 December. Welcome to This and That. I'm going to look at, we can eventually get to, and because it's longer, it's going to take several months to get through it. All time in the world. The point being, of course, that it's a new book and it's a new translation, but I would be remiss if I didn't point out some interesting and useful, for those who are really interested in it, other versions of the translation of Volume 1 of Karl Marx's Capital, Volume 1. And but today I decided I would put in this is from the latest Rand Institute report on gold and Russia's relation to gold. And I'll just read this because this is very current. This is the current issue, and one that has been pointed out by many other people, that the Russians are trying to hoard or rely on gold or concentrate some of their assets in gold because it works better for a lot of different reasons in terms of their own capital. Aside from the fact that they're hiding a lot of stuff outside of the country and in various places, and not much accountability or transparency, but that's kind of the way it goes. It's allowed them, of course, to interfere with domestic politics all over the world, but more recently in the United States. Gold has become a strategic resource for the Russian state since the invasion of Ukraine. It has a bearing on Russia's revenue generation capacity and its monetary policy. It's central to Russia's international campaign for de-dollarization. This is, attacking the dollar, the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency. It is a major feature of Russia's engagement in Africa and Central Asia, and it plays an important part in Russia's wartime trade relations. Russia intends to become the world's #1 producer of gold. There are signs that domestic production is flatlining. However, Russian interests hold sizable stakes in the gold industries of several countries of the former Soviet Union and Africa. Over the last decade, Russia became the world's most important sovereign buyer of gold. In addition, Russia also holds an undisclosed and possibly sizable amount of gold and precious stones. Prior to the invasion of Ukraine, Russia transferred the entire holdings of the National Welfare Fund into yuan, which is the Chinese currency. It's not a reserve currency, and gold. In hindsight, this was an indication that Russia was preparing for increased Western economic pressure. Gold is Russia's most important revenue generating metal, but it is not and will not become a substitute for oil exports. Western economic pressure has also had a significant impact on Russia's gold mining industry, which also has a high dependence on Western equipment and servicing. The whole issue of mining equipment as opposed to mining itself in some ways is important, and it certainly mining was important to Marx, as we'll talk about today. Gold has been crucial to Russia's most important wartime trading relationships, specifically with China, Turkey, Iran, and the UAE. It's also been using gold as a means to pay for hard currency, weapons, and other goods. So the Rand Institute folks have made some recommendations. Further research is required to shed light on the scale of Russia's international exchange in kind activities. Um, Further research is needed into how Russian actors in the gold sector are responding to Western sanctions and tighter supply chains and where they seek to sell their gold. This will be essential to determine how the Russian gold sector is changing. Further research is needed on what Russia gains from its overseas gold assets. A deeper dive into the topic could explore the extent to which Russia is accessing Western mining equipment, similar to the issues of who makes petroleum or fossil fuel, not only fossil fuel mining, but oil drilling equipment, et cetera, et cetera. It's a really important part. And now, the other thing I wanted to point out, and I've uploaded a copy into Discord, and that is the annotations to Volume 1 of Karl Marx's Capital. There are annotations to Karl Marx's Capital Volume 2 by Hans G. Ehrbar. He's a emeritus professor at the University of Utah. And why is that important? Well, he took the time, and I think he's done some other translations as well, aside from Volume 1 and Volume 2. I think he's done one also to the Grundrisse. So the point is that it's been done at least within the last decade. So it has, I think it's been used by a fair number of folks. And the advantage is, of course, that he has the English text side by side with the German text, so you can actually see, which is something the Princeton, the Pauls didn't quite do, which would probably have been interesting as well, but probably would have changed the entire nature of the book. So I'm going to read a very short bit from that in terms of chapter 2 rather than chapter 3. We will begin chapter 3 today of the Princeton edition, Volume 1, Chapter 3, Money or Commodity Circulation. But before we get to that, we can do this here. This is sort of what it looks like from the little summary for the introduction to Chapter 2 of Volume 1 of Capital. This is the Ehrbar annotation with translation. And what's useful about it, of course, is that it's fairly complete. And if you love slides, there are 3,203 slides in this file. Fortunately, it's compressed sufficiently that it managed to upload very neatly into our Discord. So if you really are interested in this, you can stop in there, join us, and play with that. Okay. Chapter 2, the exchange process. The Ehrbar annotated notes. Chapter 1 showed that production under capitalism is organized around the allocation of society's labor power, which is treated as one homogeneous mass with only quantitative differences to the different branches of production. Since the actual coordination of the different production processes according to these principles takes place outside of the production process itself in the market section, the 1.3 pursued the process through which the inner measure of all commodities, abstract labor, finds a fitting surface representation, namely money. Chapter 2 looks at the individual actions and relations on the surface of the economy, for example, the market. Now, that it's interesting to characterize it as a kind of surface phenomena as opposed to a deep structure or whatever. It explores how individuals depend on and reproduce the structural relations of production discussed in Chapter 1. The relation between society and an individual can be compared with that between two animals in symbiosis. Society does not determine what the individuals do, nor does it guarantee the individuals their survival. Rather, individuals must see the social relations and institutions in order to pursue their own goals. The social structures come to life because the need to survive forces people to accept the character masks provided for them by the social relations. On the other hand, this social framework can only persist if it enables individuals to survive and reproduce. Otherwise, individuals would have no choice but to act outside the social framework. Chapter 2 shows that individuals are indeed motivated to use the social framework developed in Chapter 1. Commodity owners can best achieve their goals in the commodity exchange if they implement in practice those social forms derived in Section 1.3 of Chapter 1, by which commodities express their values. The technical difficulties of the exchange are resolved by social forms which were derived not as instruments to facilitate the exchange, but as the forms in which value appropriately expresses itself. It is not surprising that the forms which are most appropriate expressions of the inner structure of the commodity also facilitate the surface interactions between commodities. But it is also not a tautology, and the fit between structural expression and practical usefulness is not perfect. Chapters 4, 5, and 6 will show that money not only facilitates exchange, but that money fosters behaviors that go beyond the economic necessities of simple commodity production. In these annotations here, this will be called the curse of money, the money curse. And there's a series of questions that Airbar shows. Question 361, why a separate chapter about the exchange process? Has the exchange not already been discussed in Chapter 1? Marx did not subdivide Chapter 2, but for the purpose of this commentary, it is divided into 4 sections, and I won't yammer at great length about that. You can look all this up for yourself. I just wanted to show you that you can see that he does the English translation on the left, and if you're a fan of Wittgenstein, the German is on the right-hand side. Die waren kolonial selbst zu Markte gehen und sich nicht selbst ausstellen. Anyway, so all of those things you can sort of look at, but there is also annotations which sort of integrates the Marxist notes. So you can see there are a variety of approaches to studying this and how dense it may appear. But they're good questions. They're like study questions. Number 365, for example, explain in your own words Marx's phrase that the commodity owners will or does reside in the objects which are his property. Is this a good thing or not? Where does it have its limits in our society? Are there things for which it is desirable that people's wills reside in them? So there's obviously an active component here. There's a certain intentionality, et cetera, et cetera. All these things are kind of built into examining the model, which we didn't really see in our explication yesterday on Volume 1, Chapter 2. So without going through a whole rigmarole on this, let's return back to Volume 3 itself, the Princeton version, so we can just sort of get the reading itself done. Unlike some other folks here who try and get other people on this Zoom to do some of the reading, I think it's, and yes, I think it's an important approach to do that kind of engagement. But since mainly I'm doing these recordings to help other folks, I'm just going to blunder through, sort of brute my way through the darn thing. Number 1, the measure of value. This is Chapter 3. For simplicity's sake, I assume in this book that gold is the money commodity. What does gold do? First of all, it supplies the commodity world with the material it needs to express its values. Gold represents commodity values as magnitudes of the same denominator, qualitatively equal, quantitatively comparable or comparable. It thus functions as a general measure of value, and it is solely based on this that gold, i.e. the specific equivalent commodity, becomes money. Now, this is an oversimplification, and we know that there are things other than gold, but Marx is trying to make this, reasonable for Volume 1 of Capital, and it's very clear further on in Capital, in subsequent volumes, it's not, gold is sort of default, but There are other kind of financial forms that can and will be mentioned and are important. Money doesn't make commodities commensurable with one another. It's the other way around. As values, all commodities are objectified human labor. Thus, in and for themselves, commodities are commensurable, and their values can be measured communally in terms of a specific commodity. When their values are measured this way, that one specific commodity is transformed into their shared measure of value, that is, into money. As a measure of value, money is the necessary form of appearance of commodities' internal measure of value, that is, labor time. The value expression of a commodity in gold, that is, X commodity A equals Y commodity, money commodity, is its money form, its price. Now, note that there's so much that, there's lots of other ways of configuring this. Let's just go with the way that the Princeton folks have decided to do the interpretation, then we can talk about other options. An isolated equation such as 1 ton of iron equals 2 ounces of gold now suffices to represent iron's value in a socially valid way. The equation no longer has to march along in step with the value equations of all the other commodities because the equivalent commodity, gold, has already taken on the character of money. And this means that the general relative value form of commodities now has its original shape again, that of commodities' simple or individual relative value form. Meanwhile, the expanded relative expression of value, that endless series of relative value expressions, has become the money commodity's specific relative value form. But now this series is something socially given as the prices of commodities. All one needs to do is to read a price list backwards to find money's magnitude of value expressed through all kinds of commodities. Money itself, in contrast, has no price. In order to have the same uniform relative value form as all other commodities, money would have to relate to itself as its own equivalent. The money form of commodities, or the price, differs from their tangible and real bodily form, just as their value form as such does. In other words, their money form is purely ideal or notional. Although invisible, the value of iron, linen, wheat, and so on does in fact exist in all these things. It is represented through their equality with gold, a relation that lives in its ghostly life only in the things' heads, so to speak. The commodity owner must lend their heads his tongue or hang a tag around their necks in order to communicate the things' prices to the outside world. Because the expression of commodity values through gold is ideal, only ideal or notional gold can be used in this operation. Now, you could say that the gold sitting in Fort Knox, for example, is kind of a notional gold. All commodity owners know that when they give their commodities a price or a notional gold form, they still have a long way to go to actually turn their commodities into gold. They also know that they don't even need the tiniest piece of real gold in order to estimate how much gold millions of different commodity values are worth. When money functions as a measure of value, it acts then as a merely notional or ideal money. This circumstance has spawned the most bizarre theories. Although merely notional money serves as the measure of value, prices depend entirely on real money material. And value, the amount of human labor contained in, let's say, a ton of iron, is expressed through a notional quantity of the money commodity that contains just as much labor as the iron. Now, depending on whether gold, silver, or copper is serving as the measure of value, the value of a ton of iron will have a very different price expression. That is, it will be represented as very different quantities of gold, silver, or copper. And so, if two different commodities, gold and silver, for example, act simultaneously as measures of value, all commodities will have two different price expressions, a price in gold and a price in silver. These prices will operate alongside each other peacefully for as long as the value relation between gold and silver stays the same, for example, 1 to 15. But every shift in this value relation will unsettle the ratio between the gold prices of commodities and their silver prices, thereby demonstrating that doubling the measure of value goes against its function. So there's some difference in terms of trying to estimate value because of this slight anomaly, this decision to use two metals. All commodities with definite prices are represented in the following form. A commodity A equals X gold, B commodity B of commodity B equals Y gold, C commodity of C equals Z gold, and so on, where A, B, and C represent certain amounts of the commodities A, B, and C, and X, Y, and Z represent certain quantities of gold. Commodity values are thus transformed into different notional quantities of gold, into magnitudes of the same unit, or gold magnitudes, even as the physical bodies of commodities continue to vary in dizzying multiplicity. As different amounts of gold, commodity values can be compared with and measured against one another as it becomes a technical necessity to put them into a relation with a fixed quantity of gold as their unit of measurement. This unit is further divided into fractional parts and thereby evolves into the general standard of measurement. Now, before gold, silver, and copper became money, they already had such standards in the form of their metal weights. For example, a pound, which serves as a unit of measurement, can be divided into ounces on the one hand, and it can be combined on the other hand to make up hundredweights. Hence, with all metallic currencies, the pre-existing names of the standard of weight are the original names of the money standard or the standard of price. A pound sterling, for example. Money is performing two very different functions as the measure of value and the standard of price. In its role as the measure of value, money is the social incarnation of human labor. In its role as the standard of price, it is a quantity of metal with a fixed weight. As the former, money transforms the values of diverse commodities into prices, into notional quantities of gold. As the latter, money measures those quantities. The measure of value measures commodities as values, whereas the standard of price measures quantities of gold using a unit quantity of gold. In other words, it doesn't measure the value of one quantity of gold using the weight of another quantity of gold. For the standard of prices to function, a definite quantity of gold must be fixed as the unit of measurement. Hope you can follow this. The idea is that Marx is trying to look for ways in which you can describe the difference or similarity between prices and values. And metal is one way of trying to do that. And but it is a series of transformations that is as money as a commodity form allows for this kind of standardization, as it were. As in all acts of measurement involving magnitudes of the same denomination, the measurement's stability is the decisive thing. The more stable the quantity of gold serving as the unit of measurement is, the more effective the standard of price will be. But gold can serve as a measure of value only because it is itself a labor product. That is a value that has the potential to vary. That's because, you can't get gold in terms of a creation of gold, that is the production of gold, has a certain limit to it. There are only certain places on the planet where you can sort of find gold, or you can find gold, but you'd really waste a lot of time looking for it. And particularly if you had no geological skills. And of course, as I said, there are various places where it's more concentrated in production, like South Africa, for example, or Nevada in the United States. Just as an example, you can get gold in all kinds of places. The amounts of gold are becomes problematic when how you process it, et cetera, is another set of issues. And then, of course, there's the whole market for reclamation of gold. When gold's value changes, this clearly does nothing to hinder it in its function as the standard price. Different quantities of gold will always have the same ratio of value to one another. However, gold's value changes. If its value were to fall by 1,000%, 12 ounces would be still worth 12 times as much as 1 ounce. And when it comes to prices, the ratio of different quantities of gold to one another is all that matters. At the same time, because the weight of an ounce of gold doesn't change when gold's value rises or falls, the weight of its fractional parts doesn't change either. Gold will therefore perform the same service as a fixed standard of price, regardless of how much its value changes. That's why the attraction to the Russians. There's a certain cash-like element to it that has certain stability to it. It is the reason why people diversify their wealth assets into use the gold as one thing that helps stabilize your financial portfolio. When the value of one commodity is represented through another's use value, and when commodities' values are established in gold, all that is presupposed is that at a given moment, a given amount of labor is needed to produce a certain amount of gold. That is, it's about, getting out there with your pick and shovel and doing the Sierra Madre thing and digging up gold. As for fluctuations in commodity prices in general, they are subject to the laws of the simple relative value expression, which we explicated earlier. Where money's value remains constant, commodity prices can collectively rise only if commodity values increase. Where commodity values stay the same, commodity prices can collectively rise only if money's value falls. We can reverse this. Where money's value remains the same, commodity prices can collectively fall only if commodity values fall. Now, that just if commodity values stay the same, commodity prices can collectively fall only if the value of money rises. Now, you're going to get confused with this. It is not at all true, then, that if money's value rises, commodity prices have to fall proportionally. And if money's value falls, commodity prices have to rise proportionally. So this would hold only for commodities whose value remains constant. So the point here is you're trying to get a handle on this, and the reality is that the holding of things constant, whether it's an amount or a weight or something, it has certain contingencies built into it. So, as for commodities whose value rises along with money's to the same degree and at the same rate as money's does, they retain their prices. If instead the value of commodities increases faster or slower than money's value, how much the movement of their value differs from that of money's will determine how much commodity prices rise or fall, and so on. What he's trying to describe in this, sort of tedious paragraph is just to show that there is some relationship, and it can be measured in a variety of ways, often that move around a lot, and they're not they may be arbitrary, but they're not random. Now let's return to our discussion of the price form, if you haven't been lost already. Over time, the money names of metal weights separated from their original weight names. This happened for a number of reasons. Historically speaking, the key reasons were, number one, foreign money was introduced among less developed peoples. For example, in ancient Rome, gold and silver coins first circulated as foreign commodities. The names of these foreign coins were different from the local terms for weights, drachmas, whatever. As wealth evolved, the more precious metals dislodged the less precious ones from their role as the measure of value. Silver pushed out copper, then gold pushed out silver, despite what the poet's chronology says. Pound, for instance, became the money name for an actual pound of silver. And the moment that gold pushed out silver as the measure of value, the same name was attached to, let's say, 1/15th of a pound of gold, depending on the ratio value between gold and silver. In other words, you could get pretty confused, and of course, it would be worse relative to the possibility of adulterating the metals, by some sort of melting. Anyway, alloying. In this case, pound as a money name and pound as a common term for weight are two different things, and they still are. Of course, the British pound sterling is, it actually doesn't measure. There's no real pound that it's associated with at the current moment. Number three, money was debased, a practice monarchs engaged in for centuries, with the result that nothing remains of the original weights of gold coins but the weights' names. These historical processes have made it normal to separate the money names of metal weights from their customary weight names. Because the money standard is a purely conventional, but also needs to be generally valid. It is, in the end, regulated by law. Some amount of a precious metal given in weight, for example, 1 ounce of gold, is officially divided into fractional parts that are baptized with legal names, such as pound, thaler, and the like. The fractional parts, which then count as money's actual units of measurement, are subdivided into other fractional parts that are also baptized with legal names, shilling, penny, and so on. Still, as before, a definite weight of metal is the standard for metallic money. All that's changed is how money is subdivided and denominated. And you can see how that is, if you've occasionally, and probably not very much anymore, considering how little we use actual coinage. You'll get a steel penny, a penny that's been minted in steel because of the need to have copper in war industries during World War II. And so now you might think that, well, it must have some collector's value, but no, it doesn't. Usually they're beat to hell and really doesn't reflect that much, other than it's a penny that has been molded out of steel rather than copper. The ideal gold quantities into which commodities values are transformed, namely prices, are now expressed through money names, i.e., the legally valid names into which the gold standard is divided for practical purposes. So rather than saying 8 bushels of wheat are worth an ounce of gold, the English would say 8 bushels are worth 3 pounds, 17 shillings, 10.5 pence. In this way, commodities use their money names to say what they're worth, and money serves as the money of account whenever it's necessary to fix a thing as value, and thus to fix it in its money form. A thing's name is completely external, though, to its nature. Let's say I know that a person's name is Jacob. This tells me nothing about that person. It's the same with money. A value relation disappears without a trace in the money names pound, thaler, franc, ducat, ducat, and so on. People are all the more confused about the secret meaning of these Kabbalistic signs because money names express both commodities' values and the fractional parts of a particular metal weight that is the standard of money. But unlike the multifarious physical bodies we find in the commodity world, value must evolve to the point where it has this form, which is thingly, and it lacks all conceptual content, but is also simply social. So the point is, you do need to have something that gets transferred, and whether it's abstract or concrete, that is, whether it's the penny itself or something that represents the penny, and that's the business, without verging into another lecture on the evolution of numbers. But that's kind of, there's a degree of abstraction that occurs in that particular case. Price is the money name for the labor objectified in a commodity. To say that there's an equivalence between a commodity and the form of money called its price is thus to utter a tautology. In the same way, a commodity's relative price expression also always expresses the equivalence between two commodities. But if price, as the exponent of a commodity's magnitude of value, is also the exponent of its exchange ratio with money, the reverse doesn't follow. That is, that the exponent of a commodity's exchange ratio with money is necessarily the exponent of its magnitude of value. Say that equal amounts of socially necessary labor are represented in 8 bushels of wheat and 2 pounds, about a half an ounce of gold. This 2 pounds represents the wheat's magnitude of value through money. For example, it's the wheat's price. Now imagine that circumstances cause the price to rise to 3 pounds or force it down to 1 pound. Thus, this 1 pound or 3 pounds would be too small or too large to accurately express the wheat's magnitude of value. Nevertheless, 1 pound or 3 pounds would be its price in the first place because it's the wheat's value form, money. In other words, if you were dickering for this, you wouldn't necessarily have to show all these bushels of stuff, but rather you would have an exchange that would deal certainly with this kind of abstraction, talking about 1 or 3 pounds of weight, etc. That would have this representation called money. And second, because it is the exponent of the wheat's exchange ratio with money, assuming that the conditions of production remained the same or labor's reproductive power stayed constant, the same amount of social labor time as before would have to be expended to produce the 8 bushels of wheat. This situation doesn't depend on the will of the wheat producer or any other commodity owners. Rather, a commodity's magnitude of value expresses a necessary relation to social labor time, one immanent to the process that creates that value. When a commodity's magnitude of value is transformed into a price, then this necessary relation appears as an individual commodity exchange relation with the money commodity, something that exists outside of the individual commodity. So the point here is that it's a kind of abstracted version of what actually is sitting there. The thing may not have to be even there. All those 8 bushels don't have to be in front of it. You can make these kinds of negotiations without them present. However, this relation can express both a commodity's magnitude of value and the greater or lesser amount of money the commodity can be exchanged for under given circumstances. Inherent in the price form itself is the potential to have a quantitative incongruity between a commodity's price and its magnitude of value. That is, the potential for its price to deviate from its magnitude of value. Now, this doesn't reflect poorly on the price form. On the contrary, it is what allows the price form to be adequate for a mode of production whose laws can assert themselves only as averages blindly operating amid lawlessness. So this is, in effect, the issue that appears to people that, you can may do all these kind of transactions and there are averages and stuff, it can sort of move around like that. But at some moment you got to get all these things sort of nailed down, and at some moment you have to get some order in this whole process. So back to Marx, but the price form doesn't only make it possible to have a quantitative incongruity between magnitude of value and price. For example, a magnitude of value and that magnitude's money expression. It can also harbor a qualitative contradiction that causes price to stop functioning as an expression of value, even though money is nothing but a commodity's value form. Things that in and for themselves aren't commodities, for example, conscience, labor, honor, and the like, can be sold by their owners for money. When these things are given a price, they also acquire the commodity form. A thing can therefore formally have a price despite having no value. In such cases, an expression of price is imaginary, like certain figures in mathematics. On the other hand, the imaginary price form can also conceal a real value relation or a relation derived from one. Witness the price of uncultivated land, which has no value because it doesn't contain any objectified human labor. Remember, land, labor, capital. Like the relative, and you may already be totally confused by these matters, but what he's trying to get at here is that that, trying to get these things to line up is a difficult process, but it's not impossible. And you only get these kinds of things through, social relation. That is, you negotiate these kinds of things. And it is more sophisticated just simply because you're using monetary value or weights or other kinds of weird measures or things to sort of work through this. And they are all kind of relative sets of relations that only become, worked out through the issue of exchange. Like the relative value form in general, price expresses a commodity's value. For example, the value of a ton of iron through the fact that a certain quantity of the equivalent, that is an ounce of gold, can be directly exchanged for the iron. But price definitely does not do that the other way around. It doesn't express a commodity's value through the fact that the iron, for its part, can be directly exchanged for gold. So a commodity has to shed its natural body, has to turn itself from notional gold into real gold in order to actually function as an exchange value, even if it finds this transubstantiation more painful than the Hegelian concept finds the transition from necessity to freedom, than a lobster finds it to cast off its shell, or than that the Church Father Jerome found it to put off old Adam. A commodity can have an ideal value shape in its price or a notional gold shape. Well, it also has its real shape, for example, iron, but it can't be real iron and real gold at the same time. To establish a commodity's price, it suffices simply to equate a commodity with notional gold. The commodity must be replaced by actual gold, however, in order to serve its owner as a general equivalent. If the iron's owner were to approach, say, the owner of a worldly commodity and refer him to iron's prices, though it were already the money form, the commodity's worldly owner would respond as Peter in heaven did when Dante recited the Creed. And in the Italian, thus the price form implies both that the commodities can be disposed of for money and that it is necessary to dispose of them. On the other hand, gold functions as an ideal measure of value only because it's already been acting as the money commodity in the exchange process. Hard cash lurks in the ideal measure of value. So, Marx is, fiddling around here. He's trying to sort of work through certain ideas. He's trying to articulate that there's a series of abstractions that becomes created, and it's only created in the system of exchange. I mean, you can, make up all these numbers, but the reality is that at some moment, numbers have to be sort of aggregated or agglomerated, or however you want to talk about it, that there's some reckoning at some point. And, this will ultimately work itself out, but it doesn't always work itself out the way you think it's going to work out. I may have already, this may have already lost us in far too much yammering, but let me go down and consult some of the notes, and maybe that will become clear or not. So we've gone through the first section there, and if we go down, you can see how long this thing is. Come on. You'll see that there's discussion of coins and other things in this chapter. It's a long chapter, so we're going to take several days to mess with this, punctuated or interrupted by other such yammering. Let me read. This is Marx's notes. Number one, the question of why money doesn't represent labor time directly, whereby a paper note would represent X hours of labor, simply comes down to the question, why must labor products be represented as commodities when their production is based on commodity production? For when labor products are represented as commodities, this implies that they are doubled, becoming at once a commodity and a money commodity. So that answers Bruce's question yesterday about what they double. Well, that doubling means that there are two functions. Um, and I should have been clear about that. Yes, it is a commodity, but also a money commodity. The point is that commodity is the larger general form that the structure of the argument goes through, and that money commodity is only a subversion of that. Money commodity is only the transitory form that where money that where we ultimately are getting to money. Um, Money commodities really don't exist. There's just money, but there is this functional relationship. That's how you get to money, is because it's always there as a medium of exchange as well as a store of value. And maybe that's not clear either. Similarly, there is the question, why can't private labor be treated as directly social labor? That is its opposite. Elsewhere, I have at length examined the shallow utopianism of a labor money based on commodity production in his critique of political economy of 1859, the contribution to the critique of political economy, which is a precedes. This is the 1867 version. Here I want to add that Robert Owen's labor money isn't money any more than a theater ticket is. Owen presupposes directly associated labor, a form of production diametrically opposed to commodity production. The labor certificate merely confirms what an individual has contributed to the community's labor, and accordingly, the share he is entitled to with respect to the common product slated for consumption. However, it didn't occur to Owen to presuppose commodity production and then try to use money tricks to get around the necessary conditions of such production. And the editor's note here is Robert Owen was a wealthy textile manufacturer who championed various progressive causes, including the 8-hour workday, child labor laws, and coeducational public schools. He also supported workers' cooperatives and trade unionism, but his name is most closely associated with his drive to create socialist communities that would have small to medium-sized populations. There's certain, optimal thinking here, 500 to 3,000 people, and be run according to the principles of cooperatives. An important element of economic organization in these communities would be the currency. Owen envisioned a paper currency which would be given out on the basis of the value of one's labor and used for satisfying basic wants and needs. Now, this idea of a sort of a pre-commodity or a more private commodity, as it were, or a small scale commodity or script, as often people would refer to it, it's not viable once you start going to, you still have to make the next move. If you want something, that can't be produced in your little utopian community, you're going to have to, do certain types of exchanges. You're going to have to work out, well, there's the cooperative down the road, and, they don't quite see value in quite the same way. And then you get into a whole series of trade and exchange problems. I know that sounds a little, sort of weird, but you have to sort of imagine that in the 18th and 19th century, there's some people who really truly believe that all this money stuff does have this randomness to it. It's not random. You know, institutions are at work, other things are at work. Gold is there somehow, somewhere, and what Marx is trying to do is figure out how is it that we get to a more, sort of, the word equilibrium is problematic here, but a state where all of these things can be more equal. Uh, Note number two. Oh, this just gets down into stuff. This is a little too tedious, but note four is probably, well, that probably gets into a little crazy too. We'll probably have to talk about this subsequently since I'm already past time. Note that this is available. You can read it. It does take a little bit. If you want my opinion, Marx gets, it seems often that his logic is a little tedious, well, it's this thing and then that thing, and then we have to do this thing and that thing. And it just seems to me that it could be explained a little easier. And in fact, much of the discussion for interpreters of Marx who are trying to work through this basic issue, which is why um, volume one is important because it tries to encapsulate in a relatively simple way, although you can see that it's not as simple as you think. Things need to be explained. And some of the notes here, Marx's notes, and then we'll look at the editor's notes. There's still a lot of interpretation that needs to go on. So there's stuff that gets sort of worked out in at greater length in volume two and three that are being front loaded that don't have all the stuff explained, and sometimes that gets a little more problematic. Not unlike Marx's note four here, and then if you go down to yes, there are a lot of his notes, but because it's a longer piece, but there also are editor's notes. Um, we get there eventually. You can see how extensive his notes are. All right, editor's notes. Uh, so let me just read a couple of these editor's notes, which are not they're in lowercase Roman numerals. Gold became a standard for currency in the United Kingdom in 1821, taking over from bimetallism, the use of gold and silver. The use of gold alone spread as a single standard outside the UK in the late 19th century and became the exclusive standard on and off into the 20th century. Gold finally ended its use as a currency reference when the US dollar was decoupled from it in 1971. What the gold standard provided was a restraint on the proliferation of currency, given the metal's rarity and a common reference point for international trade and currency exchange. Non-commensurate currencies could easily be converted into a gold price and back again to another currency. What replaced gold is called fiat money, versions of currency not backed by gold, but now backed by trust in the government that issued it. Number two, Marx is referring to ancient Greek writer Hesiod's scheme, whereby the age of gold was followed by the Silver Age, which was followed by the Bronze Age. The scheme was taken up by Ovid, among other poets. Roman numeral 3. This issue came to be known in the 20th century as the transformation problem. Note that that's what we were talking about last week. Marx presents it per se in volume 3, chapter 9. Roughly speaking, the transformation problem becomes a problem because Marx defines value as socially average labor time. And yet prices are assumed to derive from a different process, namely the way forces of competition drive prices toward the average profit rate. Value on one side, prices on the other. Where do the two meet? This so-called problem produced another fault line between Marxist economists and neoclassical economists. The latter, that is, the neoclassical economists, arguing that the labor theory of value is an unnecessary hypothesis and that prices can be derived purely from market forces and individual psychology. This obviously guts what is perhaps the single major finding in Marx's project. At this moment, you don't have to read anymore. It's all not worth whatever. Now, there's a second, and I think I actually, yes, gold becomes a standard, blah, blah, blah. Number 3. Number 4, I put an extra thing in there, no wonder. The term rendered here as body is Leib, which has various meanings: abdomen, bowels, womb. It is cognate with the English word life, in comparison to another German word for body, Körper, which tends to indicate extension in space of the physical presence of an organic being. Leib also indicates, or Lieb, often indicates the part of a human being that can die, Liebchen, etc. Thus, it also has strong associations with death, as well as strong associations with that particular phrase, the body of Christ. Number 5, The term translated as worldly is Weltlustig, something like taking pleasure in the world, only a few occurrences of which predate capital. Most notably, Ludwig Feuerbach, one of Marx's major early influences, used it in an 1846 work on religious doctrines of immortality. Doing so to evoke a perceived vibe between religion and art, where the latter, that is, art, is thought of as the opposite of true spirituality, as Weltlustig, cynic, gottlos, that is, world desirous, sensuous, godless. And this is the Italian from the Dante's Divine Comedy. Right well hath now been tested this coin's alloy and weight, but tell me if thou hast it in thy purse. It gets a little denser down here because then we have to talk about logic and a bunch of other things. But then we wind up in Shakespeare. So anyway, there's that. And so I'll just stop there. If there are any questions, issues, let me look at the chat to see if there have been brickbats or interventions. Killed by the elements in their quest. There we go. Let's see what else. Yes, 3,000 slides. Excuse me. I'm now going to shut this down and turn us to thank you for your attention. And in case there are any questions, you can ask them now. Now that we're